go live now on the YouTube, and we are design patterns or decision making. Okay, so hopefully you guys have had a good week. Is the microphone okay, or do I need to bring it inside so it's not quite so far away? If you guys can hear me fine, then I'll just talk like this, and we'll get on with the lecture. Yes, I know I am giving you guys a lecture instead of going to a Queen concert in the town that I am, because I'm up in Wellington. So yes, I could have gone to Queen, but you know, I had something else to do. It was you guys, so. Right, so decision making. So one of the things that you guys had upvoted was doing a lecture on decision making, and particularly group decision making. So I thought you know, I could initially do a lecture on this, and then we could look at another code review, because one of the other groups was hoping that we could look at some of their code, and do the same thing we did last week, where I kind of went over and analysed some code. Now, so in today's lecture, I was going to cover, I had two topics in mind, either group decision making or design patterns, because the concept of design patterns is quite useful in professional practice, because it's a way of communicating with other professionals, and because it's a shared solution, you're able to communicate quickly what you intend your program to solve, right? Because if I use a pattern, then people think, oh, okay, that's that pattern, I know what they're doing. If they're doing a listener pattern, oh, I know how that works. I don't need to read the detail to try and understand it. I already know that pattern, right? So rather than merely just being a clever way of solving a problem, it's actually another form of communication with other professionals. So I was kind of thinking we could do one or the other. I'm at the moment, I'm I'm looking at doing the group decision making, right? So we'll try the group decision making, and we can do some practicing dot voting. I've also used GitLab, as you've seen, to try and get you to vote on issues. There I've given you unlimited votes. So yep, no car driving past. So what we're going to do is, I was going to talk first about some design pattern stuff, and say that, you know, a design pattern isn't necessarily a completely finished solution. So often if you're doing a listener pattern, right, it doesn't tell you exactly what the code should be, it just says the type of interaction you should use. And it's a description, sort of like a template, and then you implement it in different projects, in different languages, in different ways. And that's, for me, part of that tool set that you get when you become a professional, is that you have a group of different solutions. And it's not just a single way of doing things, it's this whole pattern. You have a tool which you can reuse. Now, that also links in with what we call design thinking. Design thinking is a pattern, right? It's a pattern for a template for how you try and understand users and how you understand what you're trying to achieve when developing software. So in this case, we're looking at a standard design thinking cycle, where we start with empathize, where we start with thinking about, if you're developing a game, thinking about the player, right? Putting yourself in the player's mind. What does the player do? What am I experiencing? What am I trying to achieve? If it's standard software user experience stuff, you're saying, okay, as a user, what am I trying to achieve, right? So can I empathize with the person who's going to use my software? From there, we go down to the defining the kind of activities and problems, or defining the type of game we're thinking of making. It's that kind of defining the framework which we're going to create ideas within, right? So we're not just creating, so you might say, right, okay, So, and this happened for Alto's Odyssey and Alto's Adventure. So the group who made Alto's Odyssey, which is a snowboarding game, you can look it up. It's quite a fun mobile game. He was a designer in the UK. He was approached by a Canadian pair of businessmen, and those businessmen had looked at the mobile market, and they had seen that one of the things that was missing was a mobile snowboarding game. So they contracted him to make a mobile snowboarding game and said, hey, look, we've seen some of the other games you've made, they look cool, we want to pay you to make a mobile snowboarding game. Right? And so they created the framework for him by kind of looking at the market and doing an analysis, and then he created within that framework. You'll often have these challenges, and this is what we've done to you several times, is this idea of saying, okay, what are the things that you must include, and then you ideate around that, and that's part of that definition process. So this is a pattern you then go to. So you guys, hopefully for your thesis, you've already seen, you've got a project, you've kind of had the definition of the project, you've been adding some ideas, and now you're moving into that prototyping stage where you're actually developing some of these to see if any of them make any sense. Hopefully, over the next, seeing we're now into February, over the next month or so, you might start looking at testing some of the stuff you've been doing, testing with each other to see if it works. If you have any code that's demoable, minimal viable product, you should use other people in this class to do some testing. I have whole lectures on user testing. Most of one of our courses is a user testing course. So hopefully we did some of that with you in first year, and you can remember all the way back 2 years to when you did first year and we did some user testing. That then goes into another cycle that cycles up into the, once you've done some testing, you should see how people actually play your game or how people actually use your software. And then from there, you can go into the cycle again. There are, of course, some short circuits for this. One of those is the definition is that you can go straight from prototypes back into defining a problem, because as you try and build the prototype, you go, oh, yeah, no, that's not going to be possible, so I have to redefine what I'm doing, right? And certainly when you go into the testing, sometimes you don't need to change anything about the overall system. You just go, right, no, we need some fresh ideas. And so you go back into the ideation phase, right? So these, you can short circuit some of this, but that's a pattern for designing ideas, right? So within there, that ideate to prototype stage, so this stage down the bottom here, where we have ideate and prototype, hopefully you'll have more ideas than you are capable of implementing. And if that is the case, then what you want to do is you want to have some way of your group deciding which of the ideas they should implement, right? And that's where we go into making choices, right? So as you have these competing ideas or designs or options that you're trying to implement, and your group has to narrow those down. So how do you sort out disagreements? You always have disagreements. You won't always have disagreements in group, but most groups will have disagreements. And so there are many ways of trying to solve disagreements in groups. Sometimes they are just factual disagreements. So I have a whole category of disagreements with anyone, but when I disagree with my wife, one category of disagreement is fact-based disagreement. In that case, we just Google it, right? Because if it's just a fact that we disagree on, you Google it to work out what the truth is. You go, oh, that's the answer. Disagreement done. Okay, so some things are just a factual piece of knowledge that you can disagree about. You look it up and you find out who's right. Those are the easiest to solve. The hard ones are actually when you have competing concerns. So when you have, and this is why in Agile, you often have a product owner as well as the Scrum Master and the team, because often the product owner is, they care about the product rather than the process. So the idea is that you have someone who's advocating, and that means that you've got competing concerns. Someone is more concerned about the aesthetic appeal, and other people might be about the gameplay or the historical accuracy or the colour scheme. Now these may actually compete, and someone says they couldn't make that colour during that period of time, and the aesthetic person says yes, but those colours are all ugly and we'll never sell it if we have ugly colours. And here, that's not a direct, I think it's 5 and you think it's 4, let's Google it and find out. That is a competing concerns. Yes, and as you say, democracy is one way of also trying to vote things through. And the problem with democracy is that you tend to just get the majority rule, right? So you have a sort of what's sometimes called the tyranny of democracy, is the tyranny of the crowd, where it is not the best decision that gets made, it's the most popular decision that gets made. And that becomes it's a whole area of challenge. So there are many and many competing concerns, many competing ideas. So let's look at some of the ways that we solve these. There are types of leadership that you can go through to solve these problems. I certainly had one of the staff here in Wellington. He's formerly from Russia, and his advice to groups is that all groups are shit, and so what you do is you just pick a leader and do whatever he says. And that's what he thought was good leadership. And that's the only way a group can work. I kind of did the, yeah, no, you've not really been in Scandinavia much, have you? So he was very much on the dictatorial approach. And there are some people who will swear by a dictatorial approach where you have one person and you just have a dictator, and you often get more done when there's a dictator. The problem is you don't necessarily get the right things done, you just get more of those things done, right? Which means if the dictator is bad, you get a whole bunch of bad stuff done. And here's the show must go on. And if the dictator goes a bit crazy, you just do more of that crazy stuff because there's no tempering element, right? Now, so down from dictator, there's authoritative leadership. Authoritative leadership makes the assumption that I am the most important and most intelligent person in the room. So I will still ask for opinions, but I, as leader, assume that I am the one who understands what's going on, right? So a dictator just won't ask for opinions at all. An authoritative leader will ask for opinions and then still make the final decision. A consultative leader will ask more and will think, okay, there might be someone else who knows more than me, right? So rather than the authoritative who will kind of assumes they're the best, listen to stuff, and then they go, right, I know I know all of this, I will make the decision. The consultative one will go, okay, so John, you're an expert in user experience. Should we have a slider or a number entry there, right? And the other person goes, oh, I think we should do this. And the consultative leader will go, yep, no, that seems good, right? A participative leader will go, oh, okay, let's all vote on, like John's suggestion, on the slider versus the numbers, right? Now, in Norway, you guys actually tend to be more on the cooperative and participative end of leadership. You tend not to like having dictators, I've noticed. I've seen some lecturers who try to be dictators in their classrooms, and it tends to go badly. So you also have to understand the people you're working with. So as a professional, you have to work out kind of which leadership style works for the people you're working with. Now, there are some people who much prefer authoritative leaders to participative leaders, right? They don't want someone to ask them to have to make all the decisions all the time. They just want to be told what to do, and they'll go and do it, and it's okay, right? Because, it's above their pay grade. They're not paid to worry. So, if we have a look at participatory and consultative, we have this idea of voting. Now, one of you mentioned democracy. Democracy, there are many forms of democracy, but the principle is generally that there is a majority voting system. And so within voting, you can have a majority system where you have to get more than 50% of the votes, right? So let's say you have a group of 6 people, right? And you have 4 ideas. Okay, 6 people, 4 ideas. Now, majority would mean 3 people have to pick one of those ideas. If you can't get a clear majority, then you have to keep negotiating, right? So that would be a majority vote. A plurality vote is where whoever gets the most votes, even if it doesn't get a majority of votes, will win, right? So in a group of 6 people with 4 ideas, an idea that has 2 votes, right? If all the other ideas only have 1 vote and then someone doesn't vote, say for example, but so if one idea can get 2 votes, then that wins because it had more than anyone else, which is a plurality, rather than actually a strict majority of over 50%. I personally like single transferable voting systems where you vote for you rank everything in order, and then the options are taken away. And if you had your first vote and something gets taken away, your vote then moves to your second best option. And if that gets taken away, your vote moves to your third best option. And so basically that's a consensus style voting where everybody gets to rank in order all of the options, and then you remove the ones that the least number of people support. Right? So it gives a kind of way of comparing results of the voting as a voter for every possible pairing. There's also multiple rounds of voting. So you see this in the French elections where, and you can say, okay, we've got 4 ideas and we have to get down to 1, guys. Okay, let's all vote on getting rid of one of these ideas, right? So you have a round where you vote, and if an idea gets no votes at all, then you get rid of it. And then you have another round, and if an idea only gets 1 vote, because you've only got 3 ideas left, and whichever idea only got a single vote, you get rid of that one, and then you have a round with only 2 ideas, and then everybody votes, and whichever one got the majority wins, right? So the idea is that you narrow the options. The French do this with their presidential elections. They have a multiple candidate voting stage, and if no one gets a majority on the first vote, they have a second vote where only the first and second candidates get to stand. And that way, if you can't get more than 50% on the first time, you have to do a runoff between the top 2, and then everybody gets another second vote, right? So you get to change your vote at that point. That's actually heavyweight if you're in a smaller group, but it can actually be quite useful when you've got a large group of people, particularly when you've got like a group of designers and a group of programmers and a group of artists and financial people, because they'll have different opinions, and so actually having multiple rounds where they get to express preferences can be quite useful. There are also, rather than voting, you can work on consensus ideas. Now consensus ideas, and there's a couple of one, the Delphi method is where you send out information to experts, you get the experts to send you back information, you collect that all anonymously into new information, right? And with a potential decision of what you think is the best option. You then give that back out to everybody, they anonymously give feedback until you work through to find a consensus idea. And of course, Nordic management style is to try and build consensus. And so it is very strange compared to some of the things we do in the world where you want your employees to agree to what their job is, rather than just saying, right, you're doing that, and that's what your job is, I don't care what you think about it. So there is much more consensus in the Nordic style than in many other systems. Okay, so for our first experiment, yay! So you've already had an experience of using GitLab voting to upvote things. So I thought I'd show you a dot storming approach. Now, I actually used this board earlier for my third year class here, where I also discuss voting systems. So this is a dot storming board. Now, if you download it, if you go to GitLab, you can actually find this in various places. You can find it on the team collaboration page in GitLab, I will now also put it as a link in the, I'll click on it, it will take us to it, I will copy that and I'll put it in here, and you guys can all join and vote. So this is the idea now. Standardly in design courses, you'll have this idea of three dot voting. And you might remember, I think maybe the design course in first year we might have mentioned this. It's been a long time. I can't remember. Can you guys remember? Did we talk about dot voting in first year? I don't know if I did. If I did, tell me. But oh yeah, I can see people now joining. Yay! We've had at least 3 people have joined. Okay, so you each get 3 dots to vote with. And the idea here is you put up topics, and I believe you can add a new card. So do you guys have the add card button in the top corner here? So the idea is you can add cards and you can vote. And so as a way of testing ideas, we can see we've got 11 participants. Yay, thank you, Norwegians live participating. And you go in and you can say, oh yeah, I'm interested in data-driven design. Or this is one of the things that I gave an option to my third years here, was an extra tutorial session instead of a lecture, because I was wondering if they wanted a tutorial. I also have a medieval siege weapons as a potential lecture to vote on, because I also happen to be an expert in that particularly small field. But the idea is that as you've got 6 options here and 3 votes. So as a collective, you just click on one of them and it should add your vote to that. Now, I have 3. Oh, someone's voted medieval siege weapons. If you're not careful, I'll give you a lecture on them. Second one, you can, someone may have noticed, you can put 2 dots on one, so you can kind of block vote to kind of really up the weight. Everyone's going for the siege weapon. Someone stay at home, play video games and listen to Queen. Nice. Yeah, I'm listening to Queen. Oh, I've given all my votes. I'd have to take one of my votes away and then I can add my vote to that. So the idea of this is that you could create your own Dotstorming account, make your own board, and just whack in some ideas here, have people add ideas, and just vote for those ideas, right? So if you're looking for a quick way of sharing a voting process, particularly if you're saying you're not all in the same room, like we are. I don't know how many of you are actually in at the lab and how many of you are listening from home. But if you are trying to make a decision either asynchronously or in different locations, this is just a quick way of whacking up some options and whacking up some voting. Okay, and if you get stuck with your decision making, then this can be another idea got added. Work on bachelor project and be code reviewed. Yay! So this is a way of quickly making some of those decisions. Okay, so I thought there's an example of an online service for doing that. 3 is not a magical number; it's just the number often people use. There are configurations when you go to Dotstorming to change the number of votes, etc. Right? So this is one of those decision-making tools. Another tool that you can use, if I get back to the lecture, is planning poker. And I'll just make sure that that's right. So planning poker is, again, a different style of making decisions. And the idea of planning poker is, and I didn't update this, so we'll have to see. Service is unavailable. That went down. Sorry, I checked this the other day, but I didn't check it tonight. Okay, we can't go to scrumpoker.online. Oh, we can, they're just not letting me use that one. Okay, so if we go to scrumpoker.online, have you guys done planning poker in any of your other courses? You guys can actually hear the Queen in the background. I can see that my microphone is just able to pick it up from 3K away. That's impressive. Anyway, so I was just checking, have you guys done planning poker? Again, planning poker comes under a consensus decision making. And so what, so some of you have done planning poker. So some of you have. I'll do a quick explanation. This is an online scrum poker. Alright, you had it in theory, but you hadn't actually done it. Well, here's a website where you can actually do it. I like having online website practical, so way of doing scrum poker. So the idea here is that you can create a session, and I can call this session IMT3602. I can pick what kinds of evaluations each member can give. So I can say, the smallest you can say is this is worth 1 story point, 1 level of complexity, up to 100 levels of complexity. And I have session ID, and your name is Simon. Oh, spelled correctly. And I'm going to create that, and I have session ID 22,000. Right, let's put that into the Discord. That's the session ID. And or send them the link, which is this link. If you are going to click on something, you click on that. That is the invite members and load stories optional. Right. So here you can load in stories, and you can load in what you're going to do. And there we go. We have our team joining. Wonderful. Now, one of the things that we can do here is, as you can see in the top corner, and you probably can't see, but I'll make that bigger. This particular Scrum Poker system works with GitHub, Jira, and GitLab, and so you can actually import the issues from a GitLab repo and have them directly come in to this planning poker system, and then you can vote on them, right? So it can automatically populate the tool. Here I can go. So let's see, how hard do we think it is? What would be a good thing to think? How hard is it to sneak into a Queen concert? Seeing as we're playing that. So sneak into a Queen concert, and the description is how hard is it to get in without caught out of 100. Okay, so I know that's not normally what we do, but let's just start with that. And so what we now have is, out of a score out of 100, so you then get to see, all of you are able to give it a number. Right, so give it a score. It's either lots of small scores, because those are for tiny, it's really, really easy, really, really easy, or 100, you could never do it. It's completely impossible. And so what we're doing here is all of you get to vote, and I believe that we've had 30 seconds. So I think I can force it to move on. The description start, and I can get rid of people. And so having created this, you guys all vote, and Sandra, can you get a vote in there? And I think once Sandra gets in, right, so we now have all of the votes. So this is planning poker. Now what we would normally do, and one of the things we do in planning poker, is say, all right, the person who voted it the lowest, so Tomsterbergen, you said it's the easiest thing in the world to sneak into a Queen concert. Andre, you said, "Oh my God, it's impossible." So what we'd then do is you two would explain why if you're voting it was worth 1, why you think it's easy, and if you're voting it's a massive task or very hard. Andre would then explain his position. Right? And having had those two explanations and listening to kind of what the extremes of our collective are, we would then go for a second round. Now, you can, so the second round is when we would vote a second time on the same weight. Now, that's the norm in planning poker. You can also say, well, look, I reckon most of you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you have gone 40. So 4 of you have gone less than 40 and 1 of you gone 100. So you could also potentially say, well, okay, maybe the people who think it's about 40 could also give us an explanation of why that's the most common solution. Okay, so that would be the planning poker. We'd then run it a second time, and if I hit start again, it'll turn them all over again. So then we plan a second round of anonymous poker on the same question. Now, if I was doing this with the stories coming from GitLab, it would populate those with the issues and the issue number that's in the GitLab, and so that once we had come up with a solution, we would then put that into the weighting for that issue, right? So yes, again, you can see you guys came in a vote, and this doesn't require us to come to consensus. Some systems want you to all vote the same number, and then that's how big a task is. Now, part of the reason to do this is if you're trying to work out how much work a particular, what's the front end, what's the back end, how much is the user login going to, how long is the user login going to take, right? 1 hour, 5 hours, 10 hours, 40 hours, 100 hours, right? What is the time frame for doing that? And if we can get Morton, Jan, and Thunder and Andrew, we can flick them over. Otherwise, I'll just clock you out, and we can see what I think I can. Can I? I don't know if I have the power. I do have the power. Ha ha! I have the power to get rid of you. I'm all powerful. So if we just close off some of those so we can actually close off the voting, we can then hopefully, you keep joining. That way we can't end the voting until I got everyone gone. There we go. And we now have 340s and Jan came in, Pedro came in there because I moved you out. Right, so those are some of the ideas of doing planning poker, and so that you guys have now had a round of planning poker. If you're trying to agree on the weight of something, as I said, like how big the user user authentication is, rather than have you say, I think it's 1 day's work, someone else says, I think it's 2 days' work, rather than just saying, well, whoever bid lowest gets to do it. So if you think it was 1 day's work, you get to try and do it, and you've only got a day. That's a bit brutal, because then someone who doesn't want to do any work says, oh no, I think everything will take 3 months, and so they never do anything. But yeah, so you can't in your team just rely on people being honest. You also have to give them a way of discussing what they've done. And also sometimes I might go, that's easy. You might think it's hard. When I explain it, I go, oh, yeah. No, you're right. That actually is much harder than I thought it was going to be. Right? So it's important to try and get those ideas out, and you only know who thinks it's really hard by doing the planning poker, so they can anonymously communicate how hard they think something is without seeing what other people think, and then you can discuss it, right? Because it's very hard otherwise to get people to say, okay, who here thinks this is really, really hard, right? And people will go, what do you mean? Looks medium hard? So you don't know how far out you are from consensus when you're making these evaluations. Okay, so if we go back, and I go back to here, so we have planning poker, and here this is another system that also uses cards down to zeros and halves, right? So that's the idea of planning poker. Dot voting and planning poker are both ways also of having people see other people's choices. So the thing about buying into a decision is if you have blind voting, right, where we all just put a piece of paper in with our what we think is important on it, and then someone else collects all of those, counts them up and say, so 80% of you think this is important. If we don't get to see how people voted, we just get told what the result is, you have to have a lot of trust in the people counting the voting. Right? Whereas if you have these more public dot voting or planning poker, you can still be somewhat anonymous because, people can put some dots in, you come along later, you don't know who put the dots there, but you can see how many dots are where. Right? So you get that feeling for what other people are mixing their ideas up with. And in planning poker, again, you have this anonymous stage and then you have the sharing stage. That creates buy-in in your group. Right? So being purely anonymous often is detrimental to the group because people can't discuss how they came to the decision and why they came to the decision. Sometimes, and you do get this, when you do have public voting, it also feels like a competition, right? So when you're voting, you've got to watch out that it's not just seen as I want to win the vote, rather than we want to work the best idea. Okay? It also assumes when if you have a voting, that it tends to think that there's a single axis of ideas and of thought, so that you have the winner. And the answer is, well, that might be the best option given these constraints, but if the world changes or we have a different constraint come in, a different plan may have actually been the most important thing to do. You look at how hard something is, and then your engine changes, and suddenly something goes from being very hard to do to being very easy to do. So you need to change your decisions based on the situation. And so rather than thinking this is a linear, we've made the best decision, it was we came to a consensus in this scenario. The world changes, we might need to change that decision. And given that you are trying to also work out, the thing might change in the future, that kind of what is needed to be fixed right now, because decisions might change in the future. So we often do some things that are called two-factor voting systems, and you see this all over the place whenever you're doing an evaluation. People have pieces of paper and they tend to think in 2D. And so what you do is you just get your piece of paper, you draw a vertical line, you draw a horizontal line, you label those two, hopefully with actual dichotomous ideas rather than false dichotomies. So if you put like tall and attractive on one axis, you're saying, well, attractive and tall are opposites and can never are in fact direct opposites, and the taller you are, the less attractive you are, or the shorter you are, the more attractive. That's not an actual dichotomy, right? So you've got to label your axis with something like tall and short, and so sliding in there somewhere in the middle is medium height. So you try and label the axis correctly, and you can say, in this case, we are doing an urgent and not urgent. So we're going from across horizontally, it's the urgency, and in this case we have the urgency on the left, and the other way is from top to bottom. We have top is really important and the bottom is very trivial, right? So here, anything way down in that bottom corner of the not urgent and trivial, you don't do that stuff at all. Anything in the urgent and important, of course, you're going to do today. And then you have to work out what you do about those other two, right? If something is urgent but trivial, it's kind of, it needs to be done now, but it's not going to really change the product much. And the other one is, it doesn't need to be done now, but oh my God, it's the key feature for the product, right? So how you prioritize those middle two, where you draw that line of how urgent and how important interact becomes that's where you discuss that line of putting in commitment to solve problems. And so what you can do is, again, with the stickers, right? You have your issues on post-it notes, and people can just put the issues up on this board, and then you discuss where it moves in relation to importance and trivial, right? Until people agree that's a reasonable placement. Once you've got those placed, you can then say, right, where's our cutoff for what we're going to do? Now that we know what we think is trivial and important, and what we think is urgent and can wait, where is our cutoff line that we draw through this diagram to decide exactly what we're going to do? And so that's, again, another way of trying to get multiple issues resolved. And here there are various ways of doing that merging. So you can allocate scores to each category. You can have an algorithm that merges scores together. So you give a weighting to each area. And you can also, you may not have seen this, you might have seen it in maths, but there's this idea of parametric scaling. So it's the idea that when you scale things, that the relationships change. So if I said to you that I was grading things on a scale of 1 to 5, right? You could go, okay, so the difference between 1 and 2 is the same difference between 3 and 4. Okay, yeah, I mean that's a nice linear scale. And if I said, okay, let's scale it up, instead of being 1 to 5, 1 to 100. Scale that, and you go, okay, yeah, so halfway is 50, so I can still do that. Halfway was 3 before, now halfway is 50. Yeah, I can calculate that, work that out. So you can, if you're just scaling it that way, that is easy. It's parametric. Non-parametric, you would have categories like strongly disagree, neutral, somewhat agree, or say agree, and then strongly agree. Now, it's not clear to me that the difference between agreeing and strongly agreeing is the same distance between disagreeing and being neutral. They're not just a simple number, those are actually categorically different. And so when you give them weighting, sometimes what you'll do is you won't just give them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll say, well, actually, let's give agreeing +1, disagreeing -1, strongly agreeing +5, strongly disagreeing -5. So now I've kind of stretched those two out and I've made that gap bigger. And that can help when people realize that, yes, there is this additional weight that is not just a simple summation of an average score. It is if something really matters to you, that's more important than some people just vaguely thinking it's slightly better, right? So get away from the just assuming that what you do is you just give raw numbers to them and hope that it sums up to something interesting. The last concept I'll talk about in decision making tonight before we have a break, and then you guys get to some code review maybe, hopefully, it's hygiene factors. Now, hygiene factor, and you see this in games, can you interact with it, for example? These are threshold. Some things like hygiene are thresholds in your decision making. So they don't necessarily improve the quality of the final application you make, but without them, your application just doesn't work or isn't fit for purpose. So one of the standards ones we talk about here is a login process, right? So for some things, the login process is a hygiene factor. Once the login is smooth, improving it doesn't improve your experience of the program beyond a certain point, right? However, if you can't log on, either it fails, or you don't have any login, you just put in a username or a number, and then other people can see all of your medical data, that's a bad program, right? So it doesn't matter how nice all the rest of the UI is, if it's leaking personal information, it's a fail. So some issues, rather than saying how much better will this make the product, it is this a hygiene factor? Is this the threshold where no matter how lovely the meal is, if it's going to make you sick from food poisoning, it was a bad meal, right? So that's what we call a hygiene factor. And those are important to identify as a professional, because as a professional, if your products fail on hygiene factors, then it doesn't matter what other work you've done, you have a failed product, right? And so that's part of that kind of minimum spec. You can do all you like, tidying things up, making them slightly faster, all of that. It makes the experience slightly better. So there's a return on that investment. That's a kind of linear. The more you put in, the better the product. Whereas some of these factors, if you don't do it, your product's awful. If you do it, the rest of the things matter and not that, right? So there are many of those decisions that you have to make as programmers aren't just a linear decision. They're this kind of threshold. We need to get to a certain level of competence. Right. Okay, so that was my talk on some of the ways you can make decisions. Do you guys have any questions? So I've not seen any other questions other than comments coming through and while I was talking. I will just check on where are we? I should check on the YouTube to see if anybody's come in and made any comments there. Say something. No, okay, close. No comments on there, that's all fine. So, are there any comments? We'll take a few minute break and we can come back and start doing a code review. Now, we did have a group who were interested in doing code review. Can I get them to identify themselves again? Who were they? Let's see, I've got the message back here. Nope, that's Global Game Jam. If you need someone to do code review next week, group number 42 would like to volunteer. So, okay, so group 42, this is the ones. Yep, so after we'll have a short break, we'll go in here and we'll have a look at the Apple Pay project and do a bit of code review with them. That all sound like a good idea? Here. Break time. Yep. Sorry, I don't have a cat with me now because I'm up in Wellington rather than in Dunedin. But yeah, so go have a break. I'll have a cup of coffee. Actually, no, it's a cup of tea. And I'll see you guys back at 10 past 11 and we can continue the conversation. So, yep, and hopefully we'll have someone from group 42 who is going to help us with the code review. Okay, all good. Okay, so just to show you guys, if you're still on the stream, stage and commit. I tried to upload it, but I then didn't stage and commit it. No wonder you couldn't see the thing. Actually, in theory, and I made an merge request. Okay, so I'll submit a merge because GitLab changed its default for the IDE actions, and so now it creates a merge rather than commits directly to master. I'm both the person in charge and the person editing, so I accept my own merges. And so now the repository, sorry, I didn't have it before, but now the repository under lectures will have all those slides. So if you want to go back, you can see the group decision making PDF is now in the GitLab. And so you can go and it's got those links in it. Just in case you want to go back through and have a look at any of those slides. And I also have in here the team cooperation was the markdown that I had been working on, which also gives some more stuff on voting and the fact that Agile is a communication trick. I could talk some more about that and the 6 animal model, which I think we used in first year. But go have a break and we'll see you back in 10 minutes. I'll just move the mic a little bit closer. That way hopefully the audio you can turn it down a little bit and it'll be a wee bit quieter. I think Queen might have done their hour set, and they might be also having a break. Okay, so let's see if we go back here. The GP web. Oh, okay. So group 42. So do we have, now let's see, who was the person who was suggesting they could do it?
That was me.
Hello, Luna Mellon. Interesting. I don't have your Luna Mellon. I don't have your actual username. I see you're online. Right. Hello, Elizabeth. Right, wonderful. So we can go through the. We can go through some of your code and have a look at it and give you some feedback and hopefully talk about. And I think it would be good if you've got a microphone there. Hopefully, you can also talk to us.
Can you hear me?
Ask questions.
Can you hear me?
I hear you. I know why I can't hear you. I can't hear you because of the way that the Rode microphone works is that it requires a headphone. So I think I might be able to hear you now.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh yes, you're lovely and loud now. Though I'm not sure if other people can hear you. So that, well, the stream might not be able to hear you. So I'm going to have to work out. I can do this. Right. I'm gonna be crazy because normally what I do, of course, is have my headphones in. I'd be talking on the microphone so that you wouldn't get feedback through the microphone. But because I want other people to hear you, I will put you onto a speaker, which will just hopefully. This is this might work or it might not work scenario. So I'll just grab that and grab. Challenging. I can't unplug that. Because I have a speaker here, but it's been. The battery might work.
The external sound mode.
Sorry, it's wanting me to give you external sound mode. So let's see if I do that. What happens when you speak?
Hello, testing.
I'm assuming everybody heard that a second time. That was nice and loud.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, great. Right, okay, so I know you'll get a wee bit of echo, but at least this way the people on the stream will be able to hear you. And it doesn't appear that we're getting cycling echo through you.
Whatever works for this is fine.
Oh, well, I'm giving it a go. Same system speakers on high to hear some. Okay, so hopefully this is going to work. Right, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at your code. Now, what code in your, on the GitLab would you like us to have a look at?
My group was thinking that we could start with the pause, so gp-pause, and then if we have time, we could also probably start looking into the API for now.
Excellent, that makes sense. So here you have a solution, you've got your EME, which just says you'll have to write more documentation at some point. But okay, so it's pause or pause test? Or the top one? So
I'm watching the stream at the same time and it's kind of lagging a bit, so I can't see what you see.
Okay, so you've got 3 folders in your, so we've got docs, neo, commander F, pause or pause test.
Actually, I might suggest that Håkon, who wrote the code for most of this, could join me as well in like talking and explaining the code.
Yep, that'd be great. So
Hello.
hello,
Right, so you can go into POS.
pause. Yep, I'm in pause now. Yep, that's great. And in there, what file would you like us to know? You've got a whole bunch of
Yeah, so I suppose the tap data parser might be the most interesting one.
tap data code review. I see you. Yeah, that was the last commit. So you've done some tidying up of this for code review purposes.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yep. Okay, so I see you're using. So yeah, you're developing a Visual Studio. Yes, is that so you can get those comments are happening in the IDE? They look
Yes, that's correct.
Yep, the XML style comments. So that helps the IntelliSense know what's going on. I mean, do you find that useful to have the IntelliSense kind of pop up with data?
Yeah, it's nice, but IntelliJ is much better.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, there are a bunch of different IDEs, and people have their preferences. But yes, okay. So if we have a look at some of the code here. Okay, so is there a particular part of the code, or should we just go from the top?
I can just go from the top.
Okay, so here, I mean, as I talked about with code reviews last week, we would generally also want to know what's the purpose. What are you trying to achieve by having us review this code?
I don't know, make it better.
So that would be a general review of quality and see if there are any particular bugs, and a discussion of, is this a good way of solving the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one issue might be that it's very unreadable for someone who hasn't written it, because I spent a lot of time with this, but I don't know how readable it is for others.
It is one of the standard problems that we have when we're actually trying to create useful and interesting code, and we get very embedded in it, and so it makes perfect sense to us, but it's only because our head is so deeply wrapped inside the code that it's obvious. So no, having a second pair of eyes can be very useful. Okay, so you've got a static byte array, and so that's what's getting returned from this function, and you pass in a byte array, and you create a local redemption value. So that is something to be redeemed. So you're getting a discount, or
Yeah, so it's like Google Pass. So what they call the smart tap redemption value is what's sent from the pass to when you read the pass, if that makes sense.
right. Yep. So seems like the a byte array of redemption value is built temporarily. You try and get a redemption value from the data, and you store it in the redemption value. If you fail, you throw an error. Seems perfectly reasonable. So yeah, that's laid out quite clearly. I try catch blocks, perfectly reasonable to have it that way. So if you get down to here, you have a redemption value, and then you get passed data indef record. So that's non-defined record, or what's the indef in the middle of that?
Right, so this is like an NFC project. So NDEF stands for NFC Data Exchange Format.
Right. So yes, NFC data exchange format record. Right. Okay. Given that's an acronym, I might use that all in uppercase, but then it might look like a const. So that's a choice, right? So an NDEF versus NDEF. You're right. Working in NFC, you'll find that if anyone works in NFC and knows that data format, then they'll see that guy. If that's the data record. And so you've created a record and you're getting it from the value, that's all fine. If the record is equivalent to null, yep, that's perfectly acceptable. Throw an exception, not found. Otherwise return from the record the payload, skip 1 to array. Now, so I think, yes, you've got a wee comment in there. I think that's probably all. And having to say things like the first byte is always empty is a nice reminder that to the why you're skipping 1, right? And returning the payload with the actual value in it. I'm assuming that's just part of the format that's true. So it's part of the spec.
Yeah, so I'm not actually really sure because we've been in talks with Google about the format, but they haven't returned anything yet. So
at the moment, it's what we call a kludge.
It's just an assumption at this point.
Yeah. So sometimes as professional programmers, we call these kludges because they get around a problem not by fixing it, just by doing a workaround. And so that kind of skip is a workaround. I might, and not part of the thing. It would be possible to potentially indicate that is a with the comment on the line. When we were working commercially, we used the word kludge because you don't use the word anywhere else, which we used to basically mean here's some technical debt which we will want to go back and check later on to see if we've actually found the reason for it, right? So, but you could add a comment that this particular piece of code is something that needs to, citation pending. You need to have a justification for it, right? So you might want to add a comment of some kind of justify this hack, right? Or kludge, right? So you have, if you make that sort of statement, because if you only use the word when it means it's something to check, sometime later you go through and say, oh yeah, this is tech debt or something that you use to indicate that you need to look at this and see if it's actually true, because the first byte is always empty. What if it's not? And does that actually mean something, right? So at the moment it's a workaround, but you should record that it's a workaround. Otherwise, people won't look for it. If something fails, that's a good fail point because it's something that seems to be working around something in the program. So you'd have, So I would identify that that's a workaround. Okay, so now, my meta process here is thinking, as someone who would have to maintain this code, what would I need to know? And that's one of the things I think I'd need to maintain, particularly if I was refactoring. Okay, so get redemption value, we're passing in another static. We've got a nice summary and good parameters and a good return. That's lovely. You've got a lot of commenting here. So in a professional programming context, now again, I'm not grading. So I'm not your thesis grader. I will be looking at your work. I do not require you to do this level of commenting. Other lecturers will. You might decide that your team wants this level of commenting. But for me, this heading is this is really nice. It allows the IDE to help the programmers who are going to use this. Very good if it's part of the library. This tag holds the smart data value. So yeah, that's documentation kind of. If the tag wasn't found, the reader card was unsuccessful. So this is quite a lot of documentation in the code. So generally we'd look for less documentation in the code. So for example, on line 55 here, where we have, if the tag wasn't found, the reading of the card was unsuccessful, right? So that long phrase could be if you had a hash def, right? You defined const that was the word unsuccessful, you could say index dfef78 equals unsuccessful, throw tag was not found. And then basically what we're saying is we're taking this comment and we're, by using the word unsuccessful in the if statement itself, we turn that text into the code, and we don't actually need to explain the code then, because we say, if that equals unsuccessful, tag not found. Okay, do you understand?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And part of the reason to do that is basically to decrease the amount of comments, so each comment becomes a higher value, because if you put lots and lots of comments in, very quickly the reader will start skipping comments and ignoring them. Right? So you've got to, they're a rare resource that you shouldn't overload the reader with. So that I would probably decrease the number of comments and try and move them into the text itself. Now, for all of you, the advice around commenting: ask your supervisor how they want things commented. Because there might be a supervisor who says, no, I want to see all of this long description everywhere. And if they do, follow their instructions, do it the way they think it should be done. For me, if your lecturer doesn't care, or they say, no, code any way you like, you wouldn't have to put this much commenting in. Okay, so again here, and this applies, otherwise we can see a second time here we go. The length is 1 byte long after the 3 byte long tag name. So payload length equals, I'm just trying to get into my room, just a sec. Oh, okay. It's 11 o'clock at night here, so 11:30, so I didn't think someone was coming in, but the door made a sound. Okay, so the payload length, yeah, I'd probably say, so yes, you're grabbing the index value out of the data and you're adding 3. So the length is 1 byte long after the 3 byte long tag name. Okay, so here what you're saying is you're getting a single, you're pointing to the single byte at position, in this case 0 to 3, position 3 in the array, because the first 3 bytes are the long tag name, yeah?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the first 3 bytes, and then the next byte is specifically the length byte.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
It might make more sense to, instead of making payload length an int, make it a byte instead. I don't know.
It would be more correct to make it a byte. You're right. Also, okay, so that data, is that you pass data in as a byte array? New byte, so that gets subindex, you check if it's -1. Good. Okay, so I'll talk you through what my thought processes are here. Is that, okay, so we've got a 3 and a 1 here, right? Down in the return skip, data skip, that plus that plus that, take away payload, okay? So you're already using the skip function to make data move along, yeah? And you don't ever have to access the earlier information. So what I would potentially do is, instead of actually doing this kind of +3 and +1 like you do here, I would consider treating it a bit more like a string and moving the the header along, right? So one approach, and this this is off the top of my head for kind of changing the way you think about what's happening here, is that you actually use the skip to have data skip along that far, and then you read the payload length. So you skip it along 3 and then read the payload length, and then you skip it along 1 when you pass it back, right? So so there would be ways of skipping it as you go through the function, because you are parsing. This is a parsing thing. So you're stepping ahead, basically along the data stream, and so rather than keeping it at the thing and then just adding the 1 and the 3, you move it by a set amount, and then you move it again by a set amount, right? And so the 3 and the 1 there get incrementally changed. And I would write the console line where it starts right at the beginning. So you could write that console line up here, and then do you skip over that? No, so that's only if it's index 0. Okay, and yes, because so you know how you return the data with a skip of a certain length, right? And then you pass that to take payload data, and then pass that to array. You could increment you could increment data itself along, right? So I'm just trying to think of other ways of dealing with the fact that you are parsing and stepping through tokenized, well, not tokenized, but a specified array location. Yeah, so, okay, so because this number is not linked to this number, and I'm assuming the things won't change, but in defensive programming, when you have two numbers that are the same concept, you link them with a const, right? So that it's clear that this 3 is actually that 3, right? And this 1 is not just a 1, it is specifically the single byte that is the length. Right? So that's how we get rid of constant of what we call magic numbers. That makes sense?
So have a const with like a tag length or something.
Yeah.
Instead of the 3.
Yeah. So oh, pardon me. Oh, I don't know where that fell down from, but I just lost my voice. Okay, so, wow. Yeah, so you could make a constant there, and when you use that tag length constant, you'd use it in both places, and so we would know that it was connected. And the other one that you'd use would be basically skip the tag 3 and length 1 bytes. You would do index DFEF76 plus tag length plus length byte. No? And so those would no longer be numbers, they would be known things. And then again, you might be able to get rid of that comment because the comment would be put in to the code itself. Right? So that would be one way to do it. Another way would be to think of it as moving the head along. So you see this in when you're doing string parsing in certain languages, you tokenize the string, and then what you do is you take the head off it and then you pass it to the next function. So, for example, you would take off this data is you would create a new array that didn't have that top bit, and then you'd read its first 3 bytes, and you'd then skip and pass that on to the next function, which would then read the length, and then you would shrink the array again before you pass it on to payload. So basically you're doing this skip, you're calling skip 3 times instead of calling it once with the sum of three values. All right, so you can understand how that parsing would work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because that's a different way of thinking about this. I mean, they're both valid, right? They both work. Again, and this is what we do with code review. It's not necessary. I'm not trying to change it from something that works that doesn't work. It's just saying if you're doing that kind of skipping through it, then maybe having three explicit skips might be better than having just one with everything added together. Certainly what you've got here is more efficient, but how often does this code run?
So it runs when someone taps their phone at the terminal to pay, so not very often.
So it probably
It's not
has
very
tenth of a second.
performance needed.
Yeah, so it runs once for a human action, and human actions are so incredibly slow that you've got plenty of time. So basically, when you're trying to make a way off on performance versus maintainability, generally we go down the maintainability route unless you have a good performance reason not to. Okay, so and I'll just see if any. System speakers. Yeah, okay. Right, or just Discord because Hakon is way louder than you are. Okay, sorry, Hakon. So what I'll do is if I click on Hakon and use a volume, I'll turn him down a little bit. Okay. Hopefully that's acceptable.
Is it better?
I don't know if I can hear you now, Hakon. Anyway, sorry, I was just reading the stream and they were suggesting that I should make you quieter. Okay, so get pass in DAS, so it's the NDF, so NFC data exchange format. Okay, so tries to find the ref, data and search. Okay, so here we pass in the format, the byte array, and we get that from the data for each record in the message. We're writing to console. Right, yeah, so that's a perfectly reasonable to-do comment there. That's a good thing to leave in, is because this is, again, one of those kludge things that, this is we're not sure, but that works. So yeah, and that one of the things you do is you use documentation to find out if that actually is true, or if you don't know, you leave it there as this needs to have a citation, basically a to-do.
Yeah, so that's the same problem as the earlier one.
Right.
We don't know yet.
Yeah. So, so what I reckon, so it's you probably want to document that, and so if you find it, it's found records, otherwise didn't. Again, just document that while you're still researching. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to have, but do it with the to-do, which is good. Find a better way, technical debt, to find out if the payload is a message. New NDF message. Firstly, try to find. Okay, so right. So you at the moment you try and find it just by doing the bytes from array into the NDF record, and you write there was an NDF record if it didn't fail in that thing, and you return that record. Otherwise, you go to the exception where you don't actually have anything currently. But you should probably write to console in the exception that it appeared to fail before you return it.
Right, so the reason it's empty is as I wrote, I only use the exception to try to see if the payload of the current record is a new NF message, and I haven't found another way to do it other than using the from byte array, which throws an exception if it's not.
And you're only catching that exception so that it doesn't raise up through through the system.
Yes.
Yeah. So what what I was thinking you'd put in there would be a console write saying, oh, not an NDF message, right? So you wouldn't do anything with the exception. You would just comment on it, potentially. Could be useful to know how often you don't, so one of the things you can use the exception there for, rather than the safety mechanism of cleaning up after yourself or doing things like that, is you can just use it to see how often it is that you get a message that's not an NDF message, right? Just for debugging purposes. So that's also a possibility. But no, I mean that's some tries and catches. At the moment, you've got a bit of a hack thing going on here with the equals. But that's at the moment a perfectly reasonable way of dealing with that. You've got a wee console message that's right. Yeah, no, that second function seems reasonable. Okay, so what other code would you like us to look at? So if we go back to POS. So I'm now in POS, and I've got 5 folders, and a whole bunch of code.
I mean, we could take a look at the array extensions. It's only one function, but...
Oh, I accidentally clicked. Okay, I'll just go back a sec. Go back. Come on. Back it goes. Okay, so which one did you suggest?
The array extensions.
Array exceptions. Okay.
Extensions, not exceptions.
Extensions. Array extensions. Okay. So, yep, I'll just see that. Yep, that's all good. I was just checking the stream. So, okay, so array extensions. Again, namespace, all good. Static class, array extensions, all nice. Okay, so here you're doing you're passing in a type. So you're creating extensions for arrays so that you can do other things with them, yeah?
I'm sorry, your mic kind of cut out.
Oh, okay, so you're currently doing the, you're adding functionality to the array so that you can do get subarray index, and you're passing it a type so you can do this with any kind of data.
Oh, yes, that's correct.
Does it need to be that generic, or are you expecting there to be different types of data than byte arrays?
Probably not, but I mean, it's so easy to just make it generic, so I thought might as well.
Yeah. So this is it's a question around complexity and reusability and kind of the purpose of your code. I would tend to if my program was just dealing with byte arrays and generally didn't ever think I'm going to have to deal with an array of objects or an array of ints or an array of string or something, I would tend to avoid generics because they add a small amount of complexity, and if you're never going to use that amount of complexity, then they don't add to the value of the project, right? Now, they're good learning, and certainly knowing how to use them and demonstrating that you know how to use them, perfectly reasonable. I wouldn't take it out now that it's there. I wouldn't say, oh no, you have to get rid of the generic. But I would be just a little bit careful with it because it adds complexity without adding value. So that's, cognitively something you should think about when you do something like adding a generic. Most programmers will know what it does, but it adds that additional one layer of complexity to what you're doing. But anyway, so you've got an array length. You check if one array length is less than the other array length, and you then go string format subarray length cannot be bigger. Right, so you're passing in get a subarray index, and you pass it to an array and a subarray, and if the subarray is longer than the array, you go, wait a minute, that was a bad, you got that wrong. You can't find, that's perfectly good defensive programming there, just in case someone tries to give you a subarray that's longer. There is, so I have seen some people do this where like where they find one in the other, and so they just work out whichever one is smaller, and they'd see if that one is in the other one. So if someone got the two arrays around the wrong way, it would just go, oh, maybe they got it wrong, I will just check it the other way. So you pass array 1 and array 2, and it will check if array 1 is in array 2 or if array 2 is in array 1, which is to some extent a different function to what you're doing here. So I think your function is clearer, so I would keep it the way it is. But I'm just saying, there are some times when they do reassign these based on that first if test. For I equals into length, good standard for loop, that's all great. And you're going through and, okay, so, in terms of the cognitive issues around the for loop, so you're saying you're going through everything, and so your compare is the array, and you skip I and take array sublength. So get a subarray from the original array and compare, and then to compare sequence subarray, return I. So you're creating the sub from taking the array with the current position and the array length and checking that against, and then returning I or returning -1. Okay. So this is very, very bad performance, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So there is a whole field of research into how to make this optimal. I don't think you should try and make it optimal. So one of the things they actually do is they have a skip array of how far you should skip based on that first letter. So, for example, if you're looking for the name Simon in a string, right, and the name is Peter McCallum, right, I grab Simon and I grab the first letter and go, oh, that's a P. That doesn't. So technically, what it does is it jumps to the end. It checks in Simon, Simon. It goes to the last letter of Simon, and goes, aha, is the last letter the right one? It sees the words Peter and goes, R. R doesn't appear anywhere in the word Simon. So instead of jumping one forward, I can jump the entire length of my search string forward, and then search again. Because each time I don't find that last letter, I can jump forward that far, right? So instead of doing I checks, you do length divided by the length of the substring, right? So it's a much faster search. However, there are a bunch of ways of doing this more optimally than just stepping through and checking every substring. I can see what you're doing there. I mean, it's perfectly reasonable. It's a slow. It's understandable. I kind of don't like it because mentally, when I think of a for loop, I think of something that is going to go through every element. And here, you're not going to go through every element. You are going through until it finds something. So cognitively, for me, this is actually a while loop. So while you haven't found, keep searching, basically. And if you never find, you return -1, and if you when you find, you return the one you found, right? So yeah, for me, and I understand most people will use a for loop for this. That's perfectly reasonable. If you use a while loop, it's more cognitively consistent with what you're doing, and then what you're doing a while of is kind of a not found thing, and then so while not found, and inside the while, that's when you decide how far to skip along, right? So you can do that comparison, and then in the while loop you say, okay, well, we can skip forward a certain amount, and if we don't find it, then we'll have to exit with -1. So yeah, it's not something I would make you change here, but it's that thing to think about. Am I actually doing a for loop through everything, or am I just kind of going until something happens? And if you wanted to make it a wee bit faster, yeah. And luckily what you've got here also is that you've got some coding protection in the skip INTake, because the take array length, if array length is larger than the array, it protects you by only taking as many as there are. But in theory, you should only have to go to array length minus subarray length, because
that's true.
You can't match it once you've got further than the length of your subarray. You don't need to match those last 5 or 6 attempts, because they can't match, because you already know that.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. So you could say, okay, yeah, we're only going to go from the start to the array length minus the subarray length, because that's going to be the when we check at the end. So which would matter if you had a big subarray, but wouldn't matter that much if your subarrays were very small compared to your normal array. If this ever gets large, does this ever get large?
No, so it's only used with like a 3-length subarray.
All right, so subarrays only 3.
Not called very often.
Yeah, but it is called often?
No, so it's called like the same time as the earlier one, so only with like human interaction.
Yeah, performance doesn't matter then. I would be what I would be tempted to put in the for 0 to I length and explicitly say the minus in that bit. Because saying that you've got the minus subarray length in what you're searching kind of indicates that this is something to do with both the array length and the subarray length, which is what it does have to do. It has to do with both of those. So there sometimes are advantages, even though it's not a massive performance advantage. It kind of indicates that you understand what's going on, that you understand that this is not going to go through everything, but it's going to go through everything except, like, once it gets to the end, it doesn't have to check those last few. And that sometimes means that people think, all right, you've thought about how this works. So sometimes that kind of indication becomes useful. I'm surprised that there's not an already existing function that will return you that.
Right, so there might be, but I'm not very familiar with C#, so I tried to search for it, but I couldn't find it, so I just created my own function for it.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm surprised there's not something like find, where you can pass it to arrays. Maybe, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it is probably useful, and so find substring C#. Find text in string in C#, Stack Overflow. Look at index of. Yeah, it might be index of.
Yeah, so strings have an index of, but I couldn't find it for a byte array.
Right. Index.
I started out with converting the byte array to a hex string, so I could use index of, but I thought I only used it for that, so I
That's much worse.
went against that. Yeah.
Your current solution is much better than that solution. Find specific byte in byte array. Get first occurrence. Byte array. Array index of. Okay. Okay, so the Stack Overflow is suggesting that arrays have an index of where you can pass it to byte arrays. I know that passes a byte in a byte array. Right, but you're wanting the first occurrence of 3 bytes, so it's a byte array with a byte array. So 2 bytes. They're not. It's not a single byte array. Okay. First occurrence, array index of. Yep. No, I'm. That also suggests using a generic as a possibility, which is. Okay, but yes, actually, so yes, I'm looking at the time. It's now 2 minutes to 12. Do you guys have any other questions? Because I'll give a couple minutes and then I have to. It's midnight here, so I should probably head home to bed at some point. But no, so generally, no, that code's good, and you've got lots of comments. Probably too many comments. I would again be careful of the way you think about the way you write your code, and think is this how other people would see what my code's trying to achieve? But generally, the code looks reasonable. You're doing a reasonable job. Be careful of those static numbers and document your hacks so that you know when to come back to them and fix them.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you so much for looking over our code today.
No, that's fine. That's 20% of my job. So yeah, no, I'm happy to help you guys out. And if you have additional questions or you are having challenges with something, you can also send me emails or ping me and say, hey Simon, do you know anything about this? And we can try and find a solution for you as well. So have a good day, everyone. Now next week, so I'll ask you, and I'll send you an email asking you all to come in and vote on a topic for next week, or if there are any topics that you want me to cover in the sort of hour of talking before we do some more code reviews. And if someone could volunteer for code review, and we can go over their code next week, that would be really useful. So we'll see you next week. Okay. Night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay.